seats. We're going to get started with the second half. So what we're going to start off with the second half for the newer folks is I'm going to announce the winners of the March critique. So those folks who submitted images for critique in March, club members voted this week, and I'm now going to announce the winners, and those winners are actually posted on our club's website. Then I'm going to turn it over to Kathy and our two judges for the critique for April. Okay, we're going to. Yeah, I'm going to lean in here. So yeah, just start with. Oh, that is the. Okay. All right, we're getting getting organized up here. All right, so George has given us a slightly different view for folks who have seen this before. Now the title, the category, the club has 16 possible categories that you could have submitted your image into, and now at the very top of the screen gives the category, the name, and the artist. So the winner for assigned subject, pardon? The title is Rainstorm on the Dunes by Tom Quinn. Best Abstract, entitled Fence by Patricia Levitin. Best Architecture, entitled Sundial Bridge by Eric Ingalls. Best Fauna, entitled Follow the Leader by Janice Rosner. Best Flora, I believe this is Papier Poppy by Suzanne Hambleton. Best Natural Landscape, Winter in the Washington Ridge Forest by George Pelpel. There's a tie in the night photography category. The first image is entitled At the Edge of Death Valley by Douglas Hooper. And the second image in this category is Ice Trucker Highway in Alaska by Fred Finney. Best People, entitled Man at Work by Jay Schuff. Best Journalism, A Race Runs Through It by John Sievert. Best Travel, entitled Gondolas by Jay Schuff. Best Creative, entitled Pelican Dream by Janice Rosner. Best Manipulated but Realistic, entitled Conversation with a Tulip Tree by Ingrid Lockhart. Best Black and White, entitled Monochrome by Tom Quinn. Best Color, entitled Bristlecone Curves by Chris Schiller. One of our newer categories, Best Beginner, entitled Two Sides of the Same Coin by Lillian Guerrero. And another new category for us, Phone. This one's entitled Seaside Creek Beach by Dave McClellan. And that completes our best of for the month of March. Congratulations to all the winners. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Kathy for the critique for tonight. Yes, sir.
Yes, and we have always had this problem because this room is not pitch black and the projector is not able to project in the quality that we get online. No. We have calibrated the projector. We have pulled our hair out over it, just so you know. All right. We are ready to go. First thing is assigned subject. And the first image is NYC.
All right, can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. All right. And so I think we might be sitting too close with the microphones. I'm going to swap seats. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. All right. So first of all, I just want to remind everybody that these are just our opinions, and you can take them or leave them as you will. And so let's dive right in. I really like black and white cityscape shots like this. I think it really puts an emphasis on the shape and the form, and I just think this is a very pleasing composition. It's and it's has a pretty, it's pretty well balanced with, and symmetry, and I like that the horizon line, it's maybe a little more than a third of the way, but that's, the long exposure makes the water a bit smooth, and the clouds are a bit smooth, and so that provides a textural contrast with the hard shapes and hard lines of the buildings. You could possibly play with a little bit of the cropping and maybe crop a little bit off the left. Just play around with it, see how it changes the balance of the image, like the taller building on the left of the frame. Just to see how it looks when it's cropped out. Very, very nice image.
Thank you, Ellen. And that was by Michael Quinn. This next image is coming up soon. Roseville Night.
Test, test, test. This photo, there we are. This photo has an excellent composition in my mind with the neon sign, the curve of the yellow crosswalk bumps, and the pedestrian sign, all making a nice circle for my eyes to cycle around. I love the hint of midnight blue in the sky and the leading line of street lamps into the distance. To make the image better, I might bring down the brightness on the wall on the right side. And that's it for this image. Nice night scene.
And this image is by Fred Crowder. This next image is Warp Drive on 49.
So I thought this was taken in a tunnel at first, and then the more I looked at it, the more I realized, oh, it's just a long exposure, and then the green is like traffic lights, and so it kind of gives that Millennium Falcon hyperspace kind of effect, and I thought that was really fun and bright and effective. And I like that the bottom half of the image, gives it a weight, gives it something that grounds it, and then it also gives you like kind of and I like that there's that personal perspective of what's going on, like the hand on the wheel. You can see it's kind of relaxed, and you can tell how fast they're going, and there's more detail on the computer screen, but you can kind of tell where they are on the GPS. And I just really like the balance of this, the solid and the steady on the bottom, and the wild hyper on the top. Nice image.
This image is by Brad Oliver. This next image is Night, Yuba City.
This is another excellent composition of a street scene. There's lots for our eyes to explore, including the discovery of the taillight streaks across the bottom of the frame. I usually wouldn't like an important element like the street names above the stop sign on the left edge of the frame, but I think it works here. I also think it's good we can't quite read what's on the marquee, as that might be distracting. I don't think that the right 20% of the image contributes much, and I tried cropping it out, and I think the composition was even better. Thanks.
This image is by Jeff Alstatter. This next image is Wells Street Bridge, Chicago.
So I had never been to Chicago before, but I could tell it was Chicago, and so I think that speaks well to this image. It's sharp all the way through, which I feel is appropriate for this image. The verticals are really nice, solid, straight. Some of the horizontal of the bridge is a tiny bit off, and the horizontals at the edges are just a tiny, so you could play with it a little if you want, but it's also might be, a case of diminishing returns. But I think this is a really well, I think this is a really solid image. It's the composition is good. You've got the bottom third kind of grounding it, and then you've got these strong vertical lines going up. In the upper right or left-hand corner, there's a really bright triangle. You might try bringing that down, and you could also try bracketing to bring those down.
Thank you. This is by Rachel Rosenthal. This next image is iPhone jellyfish.
This image is obviously in the wrong category, but I'll ignore that. This is a well-balanced composition with people in the left half of the frame and jellyfish on the right half of the frame. I love the brown on blue color complement, and we can see just enough of the faces to discern their expressions. I can't speak to the expressions on the faces of the jellyfish. I'll let Jason explain that one. I think the little screen on the camera is like a little jewel that really makes this photo work. Excellent capture.
This image is by Robert Arnold. And let me just mention, I think I forgot to say that this category for signed subject is city lights. This next image is jellyfish photo.
Yeah. Or it could be a city of jellyfish. And this is the commute. But again, it's like I think these jellyfish photos, there's always so pleasing because of exactly of that beautiful contrast of the blues and the oranges, and it's like I might even experiment with the saturation on that and make it deeper and richer just to see how it works. And another thing I experimented with this image is I actually flipped it 180. I changed the orientation of that just to see how that would affect the image, and it gives it a very, very different feeling. Like this, it has a feeling of like the bright at the top, and then it sinks down into darkness, and then when you flip it, it's like your light, it's like the dark, falls down, to the light. And so it's, I think it's good to just play with different perspectives. Nice capture.
And this image is by Robert Arnold. This next image is titled Donner Lake Night Lights.
This is a skillful capture of a challenging scene with both the stars and the building lights well exposed. The yellow lights complement the blue snow colors very nicely. While you might not have been trying for a social statement, the photo also made me think about the contrast of heavy human presence in a natural landscape and the contrast of the present day at the far end of the lake to what took place 175 years ago. Great shot.
And this image is by Kathy Triello. This next image is titled Rue Claire.
So what I like about this image is that you have a nice repetition of these forms of the Rue Claire, light signs, and they just repeat back into the image. So that draws your eye line back at a nice diagonal, and that draws you into the image, and then you have these nice vertical lines to, contrast with that and give it, something to contrast with. So I'm all for images that aren't in perfect focus to work, but I think with an image, it's like you either need to like push it way out of focus and make it more abstract, or make part of the image at least in focus. And so I think this is a really solid start to an image. Just need to work on some of the technical aspects of it. And that little slice of black on the left, take us a couple steps to the right.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. And the image was produced by Jerry Thomas. This next image is Embarcadero Center.
I love the black and white treatment of this photo. Everything is crisp, and there is superb tonality from deep blacks to brightest whites. Our eyes get led up the tallest building to a deep blacked out top, which is a very nice touch. This almost feels like a mountain landscape without any people visible, and I think that's a good feeling. It's a very nice photo.
And the image is by Bob Ogden. This next image is titled Summerland Night.
So I like the strong leading curving line of this. That really makes this image work. for the composition. So it draws your eye in, winds it through. And then there's a little curve of the shoreline and there's a little curve of the road kind of at each edge. And that also works for me because it's repeating. It doesn't just, I don't feel in this case that it's too distracting, and actually in that curve kind of is repeated in the curve of the main line that pulls you in, and same with that curve down at the bottom left. I would suggest bringing down that brightness a bit in that corner, and I also would experiment with some of the overall colors and tints of it, just to, or try it all in black and white. And so pleasing composition, lots of fun. Thanks.
This image is by Gary Kartstaffner. This next image is titled Manhattan City Lights.
The more I looked at this photo, the more I liked it. There's a softness to it, probably from the distance, and it makes it feel dreamlike. The randomness of the lit windows gives the impression of semi-organized stars, like the city is its own galaxy, which in many ways it is. And the clouds were certainly cooperative that night. We should talk about the ship, though. Conventional composition rules would have made it tempting to move it so that it wasn't exiting the edge of the frame, but I'm not so sure. That's almost like an extra building helping to balance the lower skyline on that left edge of the frame. Thanks for bringing the scene.
This scene was created by Jonathan Beth. Next image, and the last one in assigned subject, is Night Lights San Francisco.
So what I like about this composition is you have the Transamerica period. It's not quite centered, it's a little bit off to the left, and then you have the road at the bottom that's in a similar shape, and it's just a little bit off center. And so they do a nice job of balancing each other out. There's also a stop right at the very bottom, and I was quite pleased by that. I thought that was amusing. I also like that this is kind of a blue monochrome shade, and it's a little bit of a different take, and I like that. It reminds me of like a cyanotype process. So on this screen, this actually looks to be about the right brightness, but on the original image file, I would suggest bringing up some of those shadows a bit. If you're worried about blowing the highlights out, you could always make a copy of it, and then you can adjust sliders, and there are different ways you can work with making sure the highlights don't blow up. Nice image. Thanks.
Thank you. And this image is by Grace Farrig. We are now in the abstract category, and the first image is Fall Reflections.
I interpreted this image in an auditory way, with warm cellos and humming oboes, with a ping of a triangle for the ripple like a rising trout in the lower right. The rich oranges and yellows with hints of green are indeed a symphony for our eyes. Wow, here we can't see any greens with this monitor. They're there, folks. I tried just a touch of vignetting, and I thought it improved an already fine abstract image.
Thank you. And this was by George Pelpel. Next image, Shapes and Shadows.
So this is, the more that I look at this image, the more interesting I found it to be. And it's like, I'm not sure if that round object, if it was is it a stone? Is it an egg? Is it like on a countertop? Is it, it just seemed like there were an infinite number of possibilities of where this could be. And I find that really interesting and pleasing and works well as an abstract. I really like the nice tonality of this. I think the soft contrast works really well with this image. And it reminds me a little bit of like a sketch where you're practicing like the hairy, scary, like the shading and the tonality, and I think this is a really effective abstract image. And you've got the diagonal lines that kind of converge, and then that contrasts with the soft shapes of the egg or the rock. All right, very nice.
And the person who can answer all those questions is Ingrid Lockhart. This next image, Waves of Abstraction.
I found this photo devastating in its abstract beauty and motion, like a liquid peacock. It's like a saturated springtime and midnight and sunset all flowing together. The only thing I might suggest is cropping a little off the right to improve the composition even further. Good stuff.
The image maker is Jim Bear. This next image is in a state of Yuba City, or Ubacity, I'm not sure, we'll have to find out.
So what I really appreciated about this image is, well, it's hard to see on the screen, but it is, the exposure on this is just long enough to make the water really soft, but it's fast enough that it gives it some really nice fine detail in the water. And it's kind of looking at clouds where you can see different objects, like, you know, maybe there's a dragon or a lion, and so it's really, you know, so you can get absorbed in the image that way. What I also appreciate is that there's a relationship between both sides of the image. You've got that, like that little wave on the far right side that flows over to connect the two sides. And then you've got a contrast between the hard rock underneath and then the soft flowing water. And there's also a color contrast, you know, with the warm rock and then the cool of the water. Very nice.
And the photographer and wordsmith is Chris Schiller. This next image is Constellations of the South Yuba.
This photo gave me the impression of being from the early days of modern photography, when Stieglitz and Steichen were exploring the possibilities of the new medium. Oh, and I love how the specular reflections are like new constellations in a watery sky. The composition is outstanding and the tonality is sterling. Hurrah, I'd love to see more like this one from the artist.
And the artist is Grace Farrig. That ends our abstract category, and now we are in the architecture. The first one is Covered Bridge.
So we all know this very famous bridge, and it's really, you know, it's great to see. I like seeing the detail of the shingles up really close. There's some really nice straight verticals, and then it goes into a single point perspective. I do wish that the photographer had taken a few steps to the left, because I want to see more of this bridge, more of this texture. I feel, yeah, I really wanted to see, yeah, because it almost seems like it's the images of two minds, like the left doesn't quite connect up as well as the other, because it's like one is very straight and very, you know, very architectural, and then the other side is very soft and very organic, and there isn't much to bring the two together. However, you know, the exposure is very nice, the sharpness, the focus is very appropriate, and I think this is a really good start to a very nice image.
And the photographer is Gary Emanuel. This next image is Stairway and Plants.
The photographer has all the pieces of a working composition going on in this photo. The curved stairway is interesting, and the overspilling photinia hedge adds an organic contrast to the human lines of the concrete. I didn't find the concrete wall adding much, however, let alone the number 2 on the far right, so I tried cropping out almost the entire right half of the photo to make a vertical composition, and I found the composition to be much more effective to my eye.
And the photographer is Patricia Levitin. This next image is a Bodie icon.
And it is a Bodie icon, and this is a very classic Bodie building, and this very classic, you know, composition. You know, you've got the steeple is about a third of the way into the image, and the verticals are, you know, they're really nice and they're straight. And then the horizon line is low enough that it kind of, you know, the hill and the buildings, they're all right about the same level, and then that also allows the steeple and the roof, the pitch of the building to really soar up above, and that really emphasizes it as the main subject. The lighting is very nice. You might want to, you know, you could try experimenting with punching up some of the clouds a little and see if how you feel that changes the image or if it works. But solid architecture image, very nice.
And the photographer is George Pelpel. This next image is Kinkakuju Temple of the Golden Pavilion, Japan.
The photographer has chosen a good composition with the temple and the tree leaning toward it. I really like how those two work together. It also brings us an exotic and interesting subject that most of us haven't seen before. I tried cropping off the bottom 15% of the photo, and I was shocked by how much better I thought the composition became. Wish I could show it to you. I think it's because the sky at the bottom is a distraction, and there's no rule saying you have to show the entire reflection. The photo also has a greenish yellow color cast that was made better to my eye by cooling the temperature and adding more magenta tint.
The photographer is Bernadette Sylvester. This next image is titled Architectural Disarray.
And it is in disarray, and I like how the photographer took this chaotic image and then found a way to not exactly control it, but show it effectively. So again, you have the vertical in the middle that's really nice and straight, and then there's a board right at the bottom where the horizontals are nice, and then everything else is just all over the place. You know, and you've got this board sticking out, but it's still, while it's chaotic and it's, highlights its disarray, but it still works within the image. And then there's a line on the right-hand side where there's kind of a little bit of, it's a line, but it also kind of curves in, and that does keep your eye in. The shadows and the highlights are good, and so you can see a lot of nice detail. And I like beauty and decay. Fun image.
And the maker is Ingrid Lockhart, and that ends architecture and takes us into fauna. The first one is Wild Blue Yonder.
Wow, what a great capture. It shows how wildlife photography can be dynamic and effective without showing the entire animal or even its eyes. Jason also had some great photos just like this, and I think this photo stands right up there with Jason's photos. I love the sharp geometric patterns on the turtle's head and the impression of flying over an underwater landscape from the turtle's perspective. This is a truly unique photograph that should be submitted to a photo competition. Very well done.
And the proud photographer is Ann Westling. This next image is Penn Valley Cormorant.
So I really like how the cormorant is, he's really well separated from the background, so you can really see the shape of the bird. And I love all the patterns in the water, and so you've got these beautiful horizontal lines and then the vertical lines of, whatever is reflected in there. And then you have the buoy that's at a little bit of an angle, so that it really breaks up all the strong horizontal and the verticals and gives a little more movement and action, as well as that wake that kind of surrounds it. So when it's cropped out like this, it puts emphasis more, I think it puts more emphasis on the patterns in the water. And when you crop in a little more on the bird, then it puts more emphasis on the bird. I don't think there's a right way. It's just what you want to focus on. Solid image. Thank you.
The maker is June Anderson. This next image is titled Costa Rica.
This is a compelling composition with great subject placement and diagonal lines. It's also a bird I don't recognize, although I'm not a birder, but that novelty is a plus for me. The bird turned toward the camera is nice timing on the photographer's part, and I also found the bird's leg sticking out to be a nice touch. I hope that was from the photographer directing the model. Ha ha. Great shot.
And the photographer and director is Bernadette Sylvester. This next image is Wood Duck in Springtime.
So that eye is just absolutely wild. I mean, it's so bright and it's red and it's nice and sharp too, and there's a good catch light on. So my eye immediately went to that eye, and which is really great for for animal and images. And I just like how and the bird is is nice and sharp. It's very appropriately done. And the reflections in the water are very nice. I like the square crop. I think that works really well. I do feel the background is a little just distracting and messy, but since that has nicely, has a really nice soft focus, you can, if you wanted to clean that up, it would be easy to go in and, with different grass textures and straighten that up a bit. But that is a really nice, solid image. Thank you.
And the photographer is Brian Dunbar. This next image is Poison Valley Antelope.
This image made me wonder about the internal life of pronghorns. Are they still thinking that American cheetahs are about to break cover and chase? Or maybe they're thinking about what they're going to eat for lunch. I love how the photographer captured the fine hairs of the antelope and the wide western horizons in his eyes. This is an exceptional portrait of an iconic animal we rarely see more of than their rumps bouncing through the sagebrush away from us. Thanks for bringing it to us.
And the photographer is Daniel Chaplin. This next image is Sharp Cornering, Rockaway Beach, Oregon.
So what I like about this image is just there's a contrast in the feeling. So you've got this beach that it's like kind of gray and moody and windswept, and and the figure at the top looks like it's deep in contemplation. And then you've got this dog right in the middle of everything, and he's wild, and he's got this warm color, and he's just having the best time of his life. And I really like that contrast in mood and tone and the visual. I think it's just a really, it's like maybe, like we've been through COVID and now things are breaking out, getting better, and like, yay, this is really exciting. So it's that same kind of sense of like, we're getting, enjoying the moment. And what I would suggest is that dark bit up at the top, I would try and bring the shadows out of that a bit. Nice image.
And the photographer is Fred Finney. This next image is titled Peekaboo.
Jumping spiders are somehow less creepy than their longer-legged cousins. Maybe it's the hairs that help them resemble mammals. The quadruple eyes are still alien, but the photographer has made sure they are sharp and prominent in the photo, as they should be. The photo has just the right amount of depth of field, isolating the spider from the background, but still having enough of it in focus. The composition is skillful, and I tried a little vignetting, and I thought that improved the image a little. Great macro shot.
The photographer is Brad Oliver. This next image is titled Sweet PB.
Those bees scare me. They're terrifying. They really are. But the sweet peas, I really like how they're much more, they're much less intimidating. But they have a really nice color contrast with the background. There's a little bit of a diagonal to it so that it kind of gives it a little, gives it some movement. It's mostly an appropriate focus. The little kind of curl at the very, very front that is a soft focus, but that's okay. I would suggest, however, making this more of a square crop, cutting off a lot of the right-hand side. And then what that would also do is it would also make the bee stand out a bit more. It is black against green, but that bee does get a little bit lost with the shadows. So cutting away that right-hand side helps bring the bee out a bit more.
And the photographer is Jimmy Marcio. This next image is Great White Guadalupe, Mexico.
Speaking of aliens, sharks have been around a lot longer than humans on Earth, from a time when it was another world entirely, and the photographer has captured that alienness very well. The framing of this photo is excellent, with room for the shark to move forward and with the inclusion of the pectoral fin below. The fill flash is well done, and those teeth in the reddish mouth and the black void of that eye are right where they need to be in the frame to make my skin squirm. I tried vignetting a little on this one, and I thought it improved an already fine image.
And the underwater photographer is Mark Davis. This next image is titled Ouch.
So what I really appreciate about this image is just how the talon just barely touches that wire, and I think that it's such a decisive moment, and so I really appreciate that aspect of it. The bottom third of it, it's all solid. There's mountains, there's wires. It's like it's and solid earth, and then everything above it is just clear blue, and then the eagle, of course, being well above that horizon line. Really throws it into prominence as the main subject. And on the posts, I like that there are 3 of them. That's a nice repetitive shape. I think that's a great shot of the wing. You can really get a nice view of the underneath. I kind of wish I could see its face, see its head, and see its response to the wire, whether it's going to take off again or if it's going to keep going. But I think this is, otherwise a very fine image. And I think the square crop for this was very effective as well. Thank you.
And the photographer is Sheila Ryan. This next image is Cozy Nest.
I love how the squirrel fur almost matches the color and texture of the tree bark. And also how the bunches of nest grass mirror the bunches of moss. And also how the vertical position of the squirrel is like a parallel tree trunk with the other 2 trunks. The squirrel is sharp despite the seeming movement up the tree, which is great. You hear me suggesting vignetting a lot in these critiques, but I think in this case the vignetting was a little too heavy. Doesn't look that way here, but it did on my monitor, and I'd back off on the vignetting a little bit. Good capture.
And the photographer is Dave McClellan. Cozy. This next image is Ain't I a Looker?
Well, he is. I mean, this is a textbook eagle portrait. I mean, the framing of it is beautiful. I mean, it gives just the right amount of space around the top of its head. The background is nice and soft and neutral, and it really gives a good, strong contrast with the white of the eagle, and even with the brown. And it's all razor sharp. I mean, the eyes, they don't have a catchlight, but that doesn't matter because the eyes, they're bright, they're sheer, they're clear, and they're very sharp, and they're looking, and you just connect immediately with that. Very, very nice image.
This image is by Janice Rossner, and that ends the fauna category, and now we are in the flora. This first image is Flowers Reaching.
I love the complementary colors of the yellow flower with the blue ones, and I also like the size contrast between the big flower and the small blue ones. Putting the flowers on diagonal was also a good compositional choice. While the blue flowers are pretty nice, the yellow flower has some challenges. At least on my monitor, it had a magenta color cast that I improved greatly by moving the tint slider in Lightroom quite a ways toward green. I also increased the contrast of the photo and increased the overall brightness. And again, I wish I could show you how much these changes improve the image to my eye. Looks pretty good up here on the screen though. So.
All right, and the photographer is Jim Bear. This next image is titled Orange.
So working with hard daylight, it can be very challenging. But what I like about what the photographer did is that where the placement of the shadow and then the 2 stalks of the flowers, it has this the tops of it kind of create this diagonal line that is a nice contrast to the verticals of the plant stems. And it also gives it a repetition of 3, which I think works quite well. I would suggest cropping it a bit on the off the left-hand side, so you make it even more of a square. And so the middle flower stalk, that is in focus, and the one next to it, is not. What I would also suggest is that the plant on the right goes up out of the frame, and I would suggest trying to there's plenty of good rock texture, and so you could so you could make it so that it doesn't stick out of the frame and give it a little vignette. And I think this is a really good start to a nice image.
The photographer is Sheila Ryan. This next image is titled Morning Light Surprise on the Cascade Canal.
Wow, it's like a miniature garden growing out of plant leaves. The sunlight and colors of this photo are stunning, and the composition is well chosen. Usually bright sunlight creates too much contrast, but in this case it really worked. The deep flower shadows improve the image rather than detracting from it. It doesn't look like it in the room here, but on my calibrated monitor the photo was too dark, and increasing the brightness a little bit, I found myself saying wow all over again. Wow.
And the maker of the wow is Tom Quinn. This next image is GV Spring Wisteria, which I think might mean Grass Valley Spring Wisteria.
Well, it says Grass Valley, but it looks like it could be like straight out of the south of France. I really love this image. I think the colors on it are just really beautiful. You've got the cool blue and the shutter and the cool purple, and that's contrasted nicely with the warm red and gold color of the building. And they also are kind of like in the same tonal range, and that really, really works, and it's a very pleasing combination. I kind of feel this is just as much about the window as it is the wisteria, but I think that is perfectly fine. And just right down at the bottom in the lower right-hand corner, there's a sliver of something else there, possibly another door or window. I would suggest cropping that out and making that corner just really solid. Maybe give it a little vignette, but this is a very, very pleasing image.
And the maker is Gary Emanuel. This next image is titled Mighty Oak.
I love the fractal abstraction of this image. There are a lot of little details for my eye to explore. The photo almost has an infrared photography feel to it that I like. And I'll admit that maybe this is a style thing, but the photo feels a little too HDR-y to me, meaning that the shadows on the tree branches are too bright, making the image a little too tonally flat for my eye. By darkening the shadows a lot and increasing the contrast a little, I found the image was much more pleasing to my eye. Thanks.
And the photographer is Ray Lurkey. This next image is titled In Transition.
I found this plant is just so interesting. I've never seen anything like it. And so I think it's really a fun plant to look at and explore. And on this screen, it is, as we've mentioned many times, it is much brighter. And I think this is about the right brightness for this image. And I would actually suggest bringing the background down a little bit, giving it a little bit of a vignette and, make it pop. But I think the placement of the plant is about right. And I like that there's the warm, bright red color, and that contrasts nicely with the cool green tones. It's the complementary color contrast.
The photographer is Eleni Prusa. This is the last image in Flora. It's titled Chinese Lantern.
This was another wow image for me when it first came up on my screen. Those rich, saturated red veins on the yellow petals are like bird plumage, and the dangling cluster below is a great contrast in form and texture to the rest of the flower. The photographer chose to not center the flower, and I think that was a good compositional choice. Again, on my monitor, the shadows were much too dark, but on the projector here, they look fine. But if you're going to be looking at it or printing it, I think the shadows need to come up. I really love this photo. Thanks.
The photographer is Bob Ogden. Now we're leaving Flora and going into natural landscapes. Our first image is No Hands Bridge with Clouds.
So the perspective on this is very dramatic. It makes you feel very small in this really, grand, landscape with the big puffy clouds and a tall bridge and the jagged rocks. And I like that the horizon kind of dips down and comes back up again, and it creates a nice relationship between the sky and the earth. And the big puffy clouds, they're kind of reminiscent of the rocks that are in the front, so that also increases the relationship between the sky and the earth and the sky. I think the bridge is, I like the bridge because it's built more of, looks like it's built of natural materials, or is it concrete? But at least that it's been weathered to kind of work with the image itself. I do think that it tends to run a bit on the cool side, so I would suggest warming it up or at least making the greens, a bit warmer.
The photographer is Brian Dunbar. This next image is Cape Blanco Lighthouse, Oregon.
The composition of this photo is outstanding, and the light in both the clouds and on the yellow vegetation is superb. The sharp lines of the lighthouse are an excellent contrast to the sweeping, almost wave-like curves of the foreground. All of the elements keep my eye circling in the middle of the photo like they should. The shadows of this photo are a little too bright for my eye, and by pulling the shadow slider in Lightroom a little darker, the image was improved. Also, the clouds in the upper left corner are just a tad too bright, and I think darkening just that corner would also improve this fine image.
This image is made by Rachel Rosenthal. This last image in this category is Death Valley View.
I really appreciated this image. You've got a really interesting foreground, and it also serves to frame the middle ground and the background. I like that the rocks on the right-hand side of the frame, they're like crashing in, and then in the middle ground, though, there's that line of the rock that's kind of coming up and crashing the other way, and, it's like a geologic, crashing of the waves. But your eye is drawn back into the middle ground, and then it continues back into the background. And I like that the clouds are kind of reminiscent of the rocks, and so that all the elements work together in a really pleasing way. The colors are, very pleasing, and they all work really nicely together.
And the photographer is Tom Quinn. Now we are in the night photography category. This first image is Venus, Mars, Saturn, Joshua Tree.
On a recent Death Valley trip, I tried and failed, where this photographer succeeded in producing an image with planets and Joshua trees at twilight. This image accurately captures that feeling of first light or last light in the desert. The blues and yellows and clouds make for an interesting sky. It could easily have been clear and boring. If I were granted 2 wishes upon the planets, I would wish for darkening the sky in the lower left corner, as it is a little distracting, and for some kind of sky showing through in the upper right instead of complete blackness. Great shot.
The photographer is Fred Finney. This next image is San Francisco from Hawk Hill.
I like that the photographer dropped the horizon line low, so it's in the bottom third, because this image, it's, the sky is the star of this image. This is the blue hour, so it's got that really beautiful alpenglow, and it's, you get a little bit of hint of the lights from the city, but it doesn't dominate or overpower the sky either. I think this is a really good balance. The clouds, they do kind of have a zigzag pattern that kind of goes back and forth. They've got these long lines. And then the city, it also has those long, there's the long line of the bridge, the long line of the skyline in the background. And then there's that little bit of zigzag created by the ship going underneath the bridge. So it just zigzags, and that really keeps drawing your eye around the image. It's very nice.
The photographer is Hano Botha. This next image is Bokkai Gate, Marysville.
The perspective the photographer captured effectively leads viewers through the gate and farther into the structures beyond, and the composition fits the entire gate in the frame. Well done. The photograph is well exposed despite the low light conditions with sufficient depth of field. There's a strong green color cast to the image, likely from the color temperature of the artificial lights, and I found that moving the tint slider in Lightroom strongly toward magenta gave a much more pleasing color balance. I might have also tried to hide one or more of the bright lights behind columns by shifting the camera position a little bit. Thanks for bringing this image to us.
The photographer is Jeff Alstetter. We're now in the people category. This first image is Marty Stewart and the fabulous superlatives.
Well, I think this is a fabulous image. That I really like that background. It's very strong. It's very, it's very contrasty, and then it has these lines that lead you into the band members, and those suits are fabulous. And I really think they contrast well with the background. And so it gives the band like a sense that like those 3 members, they're kind of like the backup, the support, and then the leader is probably the guy that looks a little bit like Johnny Cash, but he's got this, this scarf that matches with the suit. So they do have a relationship, and they tie together. And the lighting on their faces is really, really nice. It's very pleasing, and so there's the strong vertical line as the band members work really well against the diagonal lines of the background. Very nice.
And the photographer is Mike Shea. This next image, overlooking Paris.
This image has excellent composition and execution. The frames from above echo the streets below, and the child pointing with wonder draws us deeply and emotionally into the image. The large building, brightly lit next to the darker child, is a wonderful juxtaposition. There is exceptional tonality throughout the image. This photograph is a map to many things inside of us and outside too. Thanks for showing us how to see them.
The photographer is Michael Quinn. This next image is Just Fishin'.
You get a really great sense of who this guy is and what he's about. You know, he's relaxing, he's out to fish, and he's there, and he just is, and and what I like the square crop. I think that is very effective, and I think it's like he's just in a little bit of the frame, and then there's that bright bucket in the middle, and that's the second object, and then the boulder next to him. So it's like those three, they kind of create a bit of a diagonal line, and then you have the two fishing poles that kind of also create diagonals, and they kind of go against each other. And so that creates a little bit of movement and keep drawing your eye throughout the image. But, he's still chilling, just relaxing and reading a book, while the river at the bottom, provides a solid base to this image, and so it provides a solid base to the image and what he's all about. Very nice.
The photographer is Jimmy Marcio. This next image is Osmia.
Similar to the Chinese lantern flower picture earlier tonight, the off-center framing the photographer chose makes for a more pleasing composition than a perfectly centered one. The posing, or perhaps the capturing of a moment of movement of the sword above the woman's head, is really what makes this image for me. Its bright highlights echo the curves of her hair and echoes the gilded elements of her costume. On my monitor, this image appeared too dark. Here in the room, it looks just perfect. But on my monitor, increasing the brightness made the image pop into life and really made it sing. Thanks.
The photographer is Mike Shea. This last image in the people category is Schoolgirl, Mekong River Village.
So, again, with the brightness of the monitor, that brings the brightness up to about a good level for this image. I would suggest a little bit of a vignette around of it, but I really love her. She has a very sweet face. She looks very calm and very serious and very studious. And the catch light in her eyes, when you zoom in, it's actually a door frame, and then there's light spilling through the door. And I think those catch lights are just really beautiful. And it also kind of gives you a perspective of like what she's looking at, what's behind the photographer. I would also suggest cropping out just a little bit on the bottom, that little curve of the hem, that does pull my eye, so I would suggest cropping it out or cloning in some of the fabric.
And the photographer is Ed Sylvester. This next category is photojournalism, and the image we're starting with is titled Jeff at Bullard's Bar.
As a photojournalistic image, this photo is very effective. It captures the dynamics of the skier in an excellent composition, with the skier leaning toward the center of the frame and the tow rope sweeping across and out of the frame to the left. The tight cropping also heightens the drama of the image. About the only thing I tried that improved the image was a little vignetting, and I think it helped focus the image even more on the skier and made the photo feel a little less overexposed. Good shot.
The photographer is June Anderson. This next image is another Powerline proximity casualty.
So in terms of photojournalism, the presentation of this is too creative for it. And it has the drop shadows in the background, and collages should be kept in other categories. So all that aside, the images themselves are good photojournalism because they tell a clear story. You can see, and each of them, tell a story on their own, and then together they do tell a broader story. I personally think the strongest image of this set is the second one from the left. So the one where it's just a tree and he looks like he's just way up in the clouds. There's nothing below him. There's nothing to catch him. And it just gives a heightened sense of this is a dangerous job. And he's swinging chainsaws around on ropes. And I think that's very dramatic, very engaging. And I really like that his bright orange shirt stands out against the sky. And the clouds, they really make those chainsaws stand out too.
And the photographer is Dave McClellan. This next image, and the last in this category, is milking goats.
This image could easily have been categorized in the people or travel category. I'm not saying it's miscategorized. I'm saying that it's a universally a good image. And I'd also like to say it could fit comfortably into the pages of National Geographic if they were doing a story on whatever area this was. The composition was well chosen and rightfully emphasizes the tight binding of the goats in a long row for milking. And that seemingly carefree, unbound goat in the lower right is wonderful serendipity. Great capture. I could find no suggestions for improvement.
The photographer is Jay Schuff. This next category is travel. The first image is Off We Go.
So what I really liked about this image is it doesn't give a sense of place to a specific place, but it gives you a sense of place for, what's going on. And this is something you would do on vacation. Okay, he's got these great big floppy fins, so they're going to go swimming. And it's like, are they snorkeling or are they diving? But I see the snorkel, and so they're going to go snorkeling, and only one person's wearing a wetsuit, so I'm guessing it's probably somewhere kind of warmer, more tropical. And so I find that really engaging about this photograph. So you have to really study it to see what's going on. I also like the negative space of the blue, and it's at a diagonal, it draws your eye through, and I like the ring of feet. That's a brand new sentence. But it's like some people, it's like it's like their toes are turned in, where others are kind of clenching, and so it kind of gives clue to their emotional state, and I think this was a very effective travel image.
And the photographer is Anne Westling. This next image is the Elephant House, Edinburgh.
This picture screams old world in its architecture and fittings. Even the high-hanging plants are something rarely or never seen in North America. I'm guessing from their tourist pitch that this is where J.K. Rowling sipped liqueur coffees and conceived of a magical struggle between coming-of-age goodness and entrenched evil. And this image is appropriate for the travel category because it's a place I've never heard of. I love the look on the woman's face as if it's the end of a long quest in a foreign land.
And the photographer is Ed Sylvester. This next category is creative fantasy. The first image is titled Pelican Dance.
So what I really like about this image is it's very impressionistic, very painterly, and it kind of adds to the frenetic energy of the pelicans. It's like you can't tell. It's like either almost like they're dancing, but it's like I can't tell if they might be taking off in flight or if they're interacting with each other. But I think these very broad impressionistic strokes helps underscore that energy. The colors palette is very soft, it's very pleasing. It goes from a very cool blue at the top, and then it kind of gradients into a warmer brown at the bottom. And then the pelicans, they have these bright orange beaks that kind of stand out against the cool of the blue. My only suggestion, on the right-hand side, maybe make the beak a similar color as the others. So it kind of gives you more, it balances out a little bit more with the left side. Very
And
nice.
The maker is Janice Rossner. This next image is Corrugated.
In a world of well-defined sanitary borders, this image ends in crystalline fractures and fjords. It's a photographic tone poem made of brushed platinum and sounding like a rattling desert wind. For me, it's not so much about what is there as what is not there. how nothing not nailed down securely is gone in the next storm, rusted and ruined and flown downwind into the next state.
And the maker is Ellen Davis. This next image is titled Spring Lily.
So at first glance, this looks like it's a beautifully photographed lily. I'm not sure what kind of flower it is, but but yeah, it looks really, the lighting is beautiful, the colors are beautiful, but then you look a little bit closer, and then you can see some of the similar impressionistic swirls that you saw with the pelicans, but they're much smaller and they're more delicate, and I think that really works well with this flower because the energy of a flower, it is more understated than a pelican, and with their broad movements. And I just really love, and it adds a texture and an interest that I think works really, really nicely. The lighting is beautiful, the composition is nice. I kind of wonder how it would look with a vertical composition, but I think this is great as is.
And the maker is Suzanne Hambleton. This next category is manipulated but realistic. And this image is titled The Delicate Balance of Being.
At first, I had to ask myself what this image was about. Was it just about the beauty of springtime and new growth? No, I think it's the focus of the two leaves in the upper right where the branches might grow together but don't, each sprouting a fragile new leaf, each with flowers and failures along the way. I also thought that I might suggest photoshopping out the spider web on the upper branch, but what do I know? That might be the only thin thread holding this whole photographic world together. Or maybe it's the only thing keeping the two branches apart. Best to leave it alone.
And the photographer is Ellen Davis. This next category is black and white. This first image is titled Reflections on Spring to Come.
So I found this image really intriguing because it's a very strange collection of objects, and I'm not sure where they're at, why they're arranged that way, and I like the mystery of it. It's very curious, and when I thought of curious, then I thought of Alice in Wonderland, and then all these little worlds that you can see, in mirrors. And I mean, you can't see something in each of them, but you can see a face in one, and I'm pretty sure there's a face in another one, and then there's a fork in another one. So it really gives you like an insight of like what could be outside the frame. And the contrast on this is much brighter than it should be, but in the actual image file, I really like the strong contrast. It has a nice tonal range. Thank you. And I just found this to be a very intriguing image. Very nice.
And the photographer is Fred Crowder. This next image is titled Magic Pool.
Holy cow, what a magnificent photograph. And I have to apologize for the projector because I'm sorry. I'm really just speechless, but I'll point out the exquisite black and white tonality and the sense not only of age, but also of time quickly passing. I love the barely perceptible reflection of the trees and sky through the water swirls, and how the photographer has used vignetting and dodging to keep our focus on the center of the image and make those bright whites soar, which soar too much in this image. Thanks a lot.
And the photographer is Kathy Triolo. Next image is Moonset over Death Valley.
I really like black and white landscape images, and I especially like it when they're very dramatic, and the tonality of this is really pleasing. And it just gives really nice dark blacks to just really nice delicate light. I think the landscape itself is really interesting. You get some interesting things in the foreground, and there's a little bit of zigzag that leads you back. One suggestion that I would make is to crop it in a bit more, to crop a bit off the top and crop a little bit off the right-hand side. And I say that because that will really help bring more attention to the moon itself, because I feel that it gets a little bit lost in this landscape, and cropping it in will bring more focus to the moon, and it'll really increase the attention to that part of the image. Very nicely done.
And the photographer is Chris Schiller. This next image is titled Racing on the Playa.
This is a great example of fine black and white photography. The photographer saw this scene developing, recognized its potential, and executed on capturing it in the moments before it was gone. Back home, the photographer worked the image to get what they visualized, adding contrast and probably cropping to bring this image to us tonight. Very nice indeed.
And the photographer is Jay Schuff. This last image in black and white is Call Me.
So one thing about doing portraiture is creating triangles, and creating, that'll create like a space of like separation and movement. And this is like playing a game of find all the triangles. She creates a triangle, it's like the curve of her, like at her waist, there's an angle there. The entire length of her body is one side of a triangle, and then the tree is another. And even the negative space behind her, that creates a triangle. There's a triangle under her arm. I see triangles all over. And so it really creates a sense of unity. It's very solid, and it also creates a sense of movement and lightness, and this woman she looks to be very comfortable in where she is. And I also love that really light touch and that little bit of separation at the knot. I would also bring the background down, darken the background a little bit. Nicely done.
And the maker is Daniel Chaplin. We move into the color category, and the first image is Wall Mural, Reykjavik, Iceland.
There's a show at Viewpoint Gallery in Sacramento going on right now titled Art from Art. I don't know if this image is in the show, but it definitely fits that theme. With photos like this one, the question in my mind is whether the photo is documentary in nature or whether it adds anything on top of the original work of art. It is a well-executed photo with good focus, colors, and tonality, but it doesn't appear to be striving for anything beyond capturing the mural in an accurate way, and that it does very well. Thank you for sharing.
The photographer is Jerry Thomas. This next image is titled Crystal Colors.
So this looks like it could be out of a card or a calendar or a postcard. It's like you've got a great leading line of the pathway to the chapel, and then that's further emphasized by the tulips on either side, and so that just creates a natural place to draw your eye. I like there's a bit of a break with the clouds, so that creates a little bit of a negative space, and the path is a little bit of a negative space with all that green, because that's a lot of greenery, and it's very lush and lovely. And then it all kind of leads to the point of the church or the chapel. Very, very nicely done.
And the photographer is Jonathan Beth. This next image is titled Stairs and Manskip.
This photo works well on two levels. It's got an excellent juxtaposition of the seats in the skip against the stairway and the rim of the skip mirroring the railing up the steps. It also does a good job of educating us about what a manskip is, which is personally something I'd never heard of. The photo has highlights that are blown out, but they don't detract that much. I did find that adding a little vignetting helped the photo to stay focused on the center element. Good shot.
The photographer is Patricia Leviton. This next image is titled Waiting for Summer.
So this is a very graphic, very bold image, and I like the simplicity of it. You've got, again, we've got triangles. You've got a solid big triangle right in front, then you've got another one right behind it that's repeating that shape. And then you've got like these little kind of triangle flappy bits at the top, and those are all similar shapes, and they're repeating shapes, and they're repeated again. And and the negative space creates triangles as well, and then there's good color contrast between the blue and the green. Maybe experiment with leaving a little more room at the top, but I also don't think that the space at the top really detracts from the image either. Just something to experiment with, and maybe a touch of vignette, but a solid image. Very nice.
And the maker is Ray Lurkey. This last image in the color category is T for 3.
This is a well-planned, well-lit, well-directed, and well-photographed image. Everything about it is exquisite. The lighting emphasizes the curves of the vessels, and the elements speak a story of ritual and of long use. This photo could easily be a book cover or hang in a well-designed kitchen or hang over the reception desk of a fine restaurant. Congratulations, well done.
And the photographer is Suzanne Hamilton. The last category, phone. The first image, titled Where Storms Come to Die.
So again, love the black and white landscapes. The clouds are very dramatic, and they go nicely against the mountains. And they actually, on my screen, it had really good contrast. The clouds might have been a little bit blown out, but I also didn't feel that detracted from the image. I would, however, suggest cropping out probably at least the bottom third of the foreground, just because, it's like with lens, it's like you have the classic, the foreground, middle ground, background. In the foreground, you want, something there that'll like grab your attention, like even a rock, or, like get a lower perspective or something. But and I think if you crop it and make it more like panoramic, I think it'll really emphasize the mountains and really, draw the viewer in closer to the mountains. So, very nice.
And this photo comes to you from our Reno contingent, Dave Arstein. This next image is titled Rainbow.
The photographer has used the tall aspect ratio of their phone to capture the height of the trees and the span of the rainbow very well. The composition is effective, with the trees forming a frame through which we see the rainbow. Even with the low light and lower quality expectations for phone photos, both the shadows and highlights are well captured. You've made me wish you had a better camera to capture this scene, which in my mind means that you have very much succeeded.
And the photographer is Gary Kartstaffner. This last image is pink cherry tree petals.
So I like that the bottom is just covered in these beautiful pink cherry blossoms in the petals. And then, and I think it's important that at the top that they also captured some of the cherry blossoms that are still on the branch, because then that creates a relationship between the top of the top of the image and the bottom of the edge, because I think it's a curve of some sort, and it's a very strong dividing line between the blossoms and the bushes and the trees above, because there's a lot of strong vertical lines created by the trees and the branches. And then you have the soft organic shapes from the blossoms and the bushes and down in front. And on this screen, I think the exposure on this is about right. It's on the original image. I was going to suggest to bring the shadows out, but I think this exposure is about right. Maybe darken down the upper right-hand corner a bit, but I think this is a fun capture of the cherry blossoms. Very nice.
And the photographer is Eleni Prusa. And before we end, I would like everyone to give a hand of appreciation to our two image analysts. They spent a lot of personal time to give us feedback. So thank you, Chris, and thank you, Ellen.
You're welcome.
And to Rachel.
All right, thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Chris, very much. And that concludes our program for this evening. And a couple of reminders, you will be able to vote for the images you see here tonight until May 20th, because our next meeting is Monday, May 23rd. And the plan is at present to be back in the church. And I'm going to ask Kathy, is our next presenter in person or on Zoom?
Our next presenter, ta-da, is in person.
Is in person, okay. So we'll stay tuned as to whether or not it will be streamed, as tonight was, but I would call tonight a success, would you? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter and Craig and George, thank you. Went just beautifully. So this meeting was recorded and will be uploaded to Zoom in the next few days. So with that, we are done for this evening. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to our Zoom crew. Bye.